Okay. This next video is going to look at creating tables of values and graphs from an equation. We're going to be looking at equations of lines to begin with. In a later module, we'll look at equations for exponential graphs. So the first thing that we should know is that each of these three examples that are listed here, equation 1, 2, and 3, are all equations of lines, okay? And there's the reason why we know that they're in a equation of a line is they can always be written in the form y equals mx plus b, where m is what we call a coefficient, and in particular, that coefficient is measuring the slope. We're going to talk more about that in a later equation, so in a later video. So in the first equation, m is equal to 2. In the second equation, m is equal to -3. And in the third, m is equal to 1. Okay? And then the b value, that tells us our y-intercept. We'll talk about more what that means again in another video. And in the first equation, b is equal to 1. In the second equation, b is equal to -2. And then in the third equation, b is equal to 6. Okay, so remember that any constants or coefficients in equations always take the sign in front of them. And the slope tells us information about how quickly a line rises or falls. And the y-intercept tells us information about where the line crosses the y-axis. Okay, so we're going to go through a few different examples on how to create tables of values and graph from equation. Okay, and our first equation here, we've got y is equal to 2x plus 2. Okay, our x is our, again, remember that we're independent variable. It means that we can choose those values and they aren't affected by any other parts of the equation. So our independent variable x, and I'm just going to, for my table of values, I've got to choose 5 values to make a nice graph to double check. A line can be created with only 2 points, but by choosing more, by making a table of values with 5 values, again, it's better for consistency. Okay, and then our y, our dependent variable, is calculated using the x values that we decided on. So the y value is given by 2 times the x plus 2. So for my first equation, I'm going to punch in my calculator 2 times -2 plus 2. 2 times -2 is -4 plus 2 gives me an output of -2. So my first ordered pair that I'm going to graph is going to be the ordered pair -2, -2. Okay, I can calculate the y value that goes along with my next x value. So when x is -1, y is 2 times -1 plus 2, y comes out to 0. So I'm going to have a second ordered pair I can graph, -1, 0. And I go through this and I plug in each of my x values. When x is 0, y is 2 times 0 plus 2. That comes out to 2. And then I plug in my next x value. X is equal to 1, y is equal to 4. And then finally my last one, x is equal to 2, y is equal to 6. And so I have my 5 ordered pairs that I can graph. Things we might notice at this point, notice that the slope is 2, and that tells me that when my x value goes up by 1, my y values go up by 2. My y-intercept is 2, and that tells me that the point that my line crosses the y-axis is going to be at a value of 2. Okay, the next step in graphing is going to be to label my x and y axis. I consider the range of x values I need to go from and to. So I'm going from -2 to +2, and then I consider the range that my y-axis has to go from -2 to 6, and I'll set up my axis in such a way that I'm going to be able to optimize my space. Okay, so in setting up my axes, I know that I've got symmetry along my x-axis, so my y-axis will go right in the middle, but I've got a little bit more greater positive y values than I do negative y values, so I've set it up so I've got my y-axis is a little bit lower in the plane that we're looking at. I've also chosen to label only every fourth tick mark to really make the best use of the space. And now I can label my points. So I've got the point -2, -2, -1, 0, 0, 2, 1, 4, and 2, 6. After all of my points are plotted, I connect them with a straight line. Because we're only looking at a part of the line, it's a good habit to put arrows at both ends of the line that we're graphing. And then as well, later on, we're going to be graphing multiple lines on a single set of axes. So it's a good habit. And we expect you to label each of your graphs with the equation as well. Okay, so just to go through the steps for graphing again, we selected our x values. Using those x values, we calculated the corresponding y values, which we knew from using the formula, right? After we had our table of values created, we drew and labeled our x-axis and our y-axis. Next, we plotted the points and connected the points with a line. Our final step was to label the line with the equation. Okay, now that we've done one example together, try the next example on your own. You've got the equation y is equal to -10x plus 4. If you pause the video, I'll put up the final results and you can again check your answer after you've done it yourself. Okay, so your graph might vary a little bit differently here, but you should have your x values chosen, and we're asking that you choose at least 5 values, some positive, some negative. So the smallest values you could choose are -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. If you choose those values, you'll calculate your y values. You'll have to label your x and y axis. We want to choose values so that we can optimize the space. Again, your labeling might vary. I labeled every 4 squares along the x-axis, and every square along the y-axis goes up by 3 in my situation. Yeah, excellent work. As you're doing practice, and if you want to make different questions for yourself, I want to share with you a great piece of free graphing software that's available. It's called Desmos. You can find it at desmos.com/calculator. And if you put in an equation like y equals -10x plus 4, exactly as written, it'll graph it for you. Again, that might not immediately look like what we just graphed, but you can change the x-axis so that it goes from -2 to 2, and then the y-axis if it goes from about -18 up to 30. With a little bit of change. Again, we can see that it has all the same details that our original graph had. Excellent work. Let's look at our next example. So what changes in our next example is that our slope coefficient is now a fraction. Y is equal to 1/2 x plus 2. We can use our same techniques as before, right? We're going to choose our x values and then calculate our y values. However, if you choose your x value to be -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2, then for some of your values, you're going to end up with fraction or decimal values coming out of your calculator. So if you put in x equals -1 in, again, you're going to get a decimal value out. So we might want to adjust the values we choose for our tables of values so that we only get whole number inputs. To figure that out, whatever value is in the denominator, okay, we're going to ensure that our x values go up based on multiples of that value. So because our denominator is 2, then my x values are going to go up or down by 2. So instead of having -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2, I'm going to choose -4 and -2, 0, 2, and 4. Now that I've chosen those x values based on multiples of the denominator and the fraction, I can calculate my y values. They're going to come out to whole numbers, and that'll just be easier for us to graph. So with that information in hand, complete your table of values, draw your axes, plot the graph, and then check your answers. So pause the video now to do that practice work, and then check your answers back once it's filled in. Great work. So your graph should look something like this. So we have a y-intercept at 2, and then the slope is half, which means that it rises up 1 unit for every 2 that it moves horizontally. Remember to label your axes, and be sure to also label your equation and put those arrows at the end of all of your axes and lines to show that they continue on. Okay. Our fourth and final example equation is of the form 2y minus 10x plus 4 is equal to 0. Okay, when an equation is given in this form, in the standard form, first we need to rearrange it to get it in y equals mx plus b form in order to create our table of values. We talked, I used the term independent variable and dependent variable before. In order to create a table of values, we have to have that dependent variable rearranged for so that we can sub in a value and solve. So in D2L, you should find a module 0 that will help you review your algebra skills if you forget. But remember, when you're solving for a variable, we figure out what term that it's in, and we want to first move the other terms to the opposite side of the equation by using the opposite operation. So I'm adding 10x to both sides, and I'm subtracting 4 from both sides. That allows me to get the 2y term by itself. After I've added or subtracted, to transpose the terms from the left-hand side to the right-hand side, then I can divide by that coefficient in front of the y value in order to isolate y. We have to divide everything on the right-hand side by 2. So I have 10x divided by 2 leaves me with 5x, and then negative 4 divided by 2 leaves me with 2. Now that I've rearranged my formula to get it in y equals mx plus b form, we can generate our table of values, draw our axes, and draw our line. Okay, so pause the video, complete your table of values now, and then double check your work. If you need to review your algebra before moving on, feel free to go back and look at those module 0 algebra review pieces as well, or speak to the instructor or your tutor. Okay, so the graph of 2y minus 10x plus 4 equals 0 is the same as the graph of y equals 5x minus 2. And you have your example here. Okay, excellent. And if you're feeling confident in the next part of the notes, we're going to learn more about those y-intercepts and slope that we've mentioned a little bit so far.